Good morning. And we are doing this lesson, Lauren, in memory of.
Of my dad's first cousin, Norman Levy.
Thank you. Le'ilui nishmato, for the elevation of his soul. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And we are dealing with I'll show you a picture of it to begin with, and that is this tzitz hazahav. That's here, you can see it now. And let me, don't want to make that. Yeah, I just want to make it bigger for you. See what I can do. So this is what we're talking about, this gold band that fit on this part of the high priest's forehead. And you notice that it was attached by these ribbons. And we're going to be talking about the ribbons. And I'll give you another picture to show you what it looked like in the back. Notice that it went over his headdress and his mitznefet. That was the Hebrew word. Let's see if I've got some other, here we go. Let's take a look at this. Now you can see perhaps a little clearer what we're talking about. And it said Kodesh Lashem. That's what this said. I believe it was in order to atone for arrogance. That's what this was there. And Rashi will tell us also specifically what it atoned for, because it talks about that at some point in the text. So let me go to the text now.
I just wanted to mention that when we were studying this at BSKI and Shelley Rudensky was looking at a book with these pictures,
yes.
And she remarked that it looked like a chef with the apron and the chef hat.
You know something? Sometimes out of the mouths of babes and sucklings, you know, because right now we consider our table where we eat to be our altar. That's so the idea, this sort of idea of hospitality and sharing a meal. I mean, you know, I will never forget all the months and Shabbatot that we spent together on Shabbat afternoon or at lunchtime, you know, enjoying a meal, Shabbos meal together. That was pretty special. So, but it's, you know, very often things get resolved. Hopefully they do, you know, when you're sharing like that. And of course, the whole, you know, the discoveries I made when I started to cook a little bit, and just how much trust is involved. And when people eat what you're preparing and they're actually ingesting it, there's something very, very intimate about that. So unless you're actually involved in it, it's hard to realize it. At any rate, let's thank you for that remembrance. Let's go back to the verse. V'samta oto al ptil tchelet. You shall place it, and I'm translating patil as a ribbon, because that's what it looked like, right? A ribbon of tchelet, of that particular blue. V'haya al hamitznefet, and it shall be on the mitznefet. That's that headdress. And you saw in the picture how it was on the headdress, right? El mul pnei hamitznefet, towards or opposite. Mul usually means opposite. The front, the pnei, the face of the mitznefet, shall it be. Now let's take a look at how Rashi tries to deconstruct all these things. Al ptil tchelet, on the ribbon of tchelet. Uvemakom acher, but in another place, in another scriptural text, Omer, it says in Exodus chapter 39, Vayitnu alav ptil tchelet. It says they shall place upon it a ribbon of blue. The od kativ kan, and here it also says, right here, right? V'haya al hamitznefet, v'haya al hamitznafet. Well, that's the pausal form of mitznefet, right? It shall be on, right? So you're saying you're going to put this band, right, on the patil, and then it says it's on the mitznefet, right? Ulamata, and later on it says, and later it says, V'haya al metzach Aharon. This is the next verse here. right here in 38, right? V'haya al metzach Aharon. It shall be on Aaron's forehead. That's a lot of different places that it's saying it should be. Uveshchitat kodshim, and in the chapter called Shchitat Kadoshim, the sacrifice of holy animals, and this is Zavachim. This has to do with offerings, and the tractate page 19. Excuse me. Shaninu, we learned. Sa'aro haya nir'eh, his hair, that is Aaron's hair, was visible bein tzitz lemitznefet, between the tzitz, between the band and the mitznefet, the headgear. Shesham maniach tefillin, because that was the place where he'd put on his tefillin, right? It's still a mitzvah to put on tefillin, so that's where he'd put it. And I'll do a quick new share there just to show you, although this particular mannequin does not have hair, but we're going to have to assume that this is where he'd place his tefillin. Now, this is interesting because I can tell you it is not really the place for other people. This is where he had to put his tefillin. In general, I believe the accepted position of where the head tefillin go are on the fontanelle, right? That above actually the hairline, and in that area where the baby's head is still soft and undeveloped. But anyway, you can see that there's a space here. But right now, without the picture, we're going to have to just keep trying to visualize, right, what's going on. So let's go on. Okay. Lamadnu. So from all of this, we learn shahamitznefet lamala, that the mitznefet, that the headgear had to be above the gova harosh. It had to be on the top part of the head. The eino amuka, and it isn't deep, right? The headdress isn't something that goes deep over the head. Likanespa kol harosh, so that the entire head, and I think we're talking about the perimeter perhaps of the head, right? Or the circumference of the head could go, the entire circumference could go into it, or the entire forehead area could go into it. Ad ha-metzach, up until the forehead, right? V'hatzitz milmata, and the tzitz, this band, was below, uvahaptilim, in other words, below the mitznefet, the headgear, v'haptilim, and these ribbons, hayu banikavim, were in cracks, there were these little apertures in the tzitz, utluyin bo, okay, and they are suspended by it, and I think in it, bishnei rashim, on their two heads, okay. So I mean, I think here when he says bishnei rashim, he means at the two extremities, uva emtsao, and in the middle, and there would be shisha, 6 bands, bishalosh makomot halalu, in these 3 places, til milmala echad, 1 ribbon above, in other words, that went over the headdress, and we'll take a careful look and see that, okay, mi bachutz, on the outside, ve'echad mi bifnim, and 1 on the inside, and kenegdo, opposite, and I think he's talking here about on the other, with the 2 extremities, those bands, they were doubled, 1 on top of the other. V'kosho roshei haptilim, and he tied together the ends of these bands, me'achorei ha'oref, behind his, the nape of his neck, okay? Shloshtan, all 3 of them. V'nimtza'u bein orech hatas, and they were found between the length of the band, right, of this headband, uftile rashav, and the bands or the ribbons that are on his head, Nope, sorry. Rashav here means the ends. Makifin et hakadkad. They go around, they surround the skull. Uftil ha'emtsa'i, and the middle band, shebarosho, that is on, I think he means is on the top. Let me quickly keep going. I'm sorry I can't have both pictures at the same time. I don't believe I can. But let's take a look at this and see if this is helpful. All right. So here you can see one, and you can see just carefully how that's doubled. And this is his end, the roshul here. And here, this is above. Do you see how this is suspended above that? There's that aperture there, and it's just one band that goes and is folded there. And of course, on the opposite side, the same deal. And so that's how you have six, right? Six of these things, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 2 on the other side. But I think this picture makes clear what Rashi is trying to say. And here we have it in the back. How they're all tied right there. Now, I'm not sure that's, whether, I guess that is, I mean, the nape of the neck is here. So I could be wrong in terms of describing that. I always thought the orif meant that area here. But
Here it says nape as well.
yeah, but it isn't going down to the nape. You notice that?
The ends are hanging down to the nape.
That's true. The ends are, but he says they're tied, right? And that's where they're tied. And maybe you're right, Lauren. That's maybe how we need to understand it, is that they are supposed to extend down to the nape. And by the way, the back, the little knot of the head fill-in actually is the location of it actually is in the nape of the neck behind those two sinews that you have there. That's the place of the knot. So I'm going to give you another picture here, just for the front again. But I hope this. As I said, this is difficult. It's not, for Rashi to do what he's doing is quite a challenge. Yeah, but I think the pictures, the person, I think it's Moshe Levine who put this together. One of the very early attempts to actually construct a model of the tabernacle and the high priest, the garb of the high priest. Okay, let me see. Okay, I'm just finding the place here. Okay. Kashur im Rashi Hashnayim, and the one that the middle one that's on the Berosho. So in his head, I mean, you can understand it either as the fact that it's going over his head, or Rosho if it refers to the tzitz, right? It's not very clear, right? Because we saw how it's tied at the top of the band there. There's that little aperture there. Kashur im Rashi Hashnayim, right? So there we go. I think we did this already, but I'll do it again. They're tied with the ends of the other two. V'holech al pnei rochav harosh, and they go on over the width of the head, milmala, above, right? So in other words, above, over the mitznefet, over the headgear. Nimtza asui kemin kova. So you could say it's made like a kind of a hat. But al patil ha'emsa'i, and regarding the middle ribbon, hu omer v'haya ala mitznefet. Regarding that, it's talking about that middle ribbon, and that's what the Torah is referring to when it says it shall be on the headgear, al hamitznefet. V'haya noten hatzitz al rosho, and he placed this ribbon on his head, kemin kova, like a type of a hat, al hamitznefet, on the mitznefet, on the headgear, v'hapatil ha'im sa'i, and the middle ribbon, machaziko, would hold it in place. So in other words, I think holding it is referring to the mitznefet. Remember, if this mitznefet was made in such a way that it really didn't go over his head too much at all, then in fact these ribbons of the Nezer HaKodesh would in fact hold it in place. She'eino nofel, so that it wouldn't fall. V'hatas, and this is the band, this is referring to that gold band, talui keneged mitzcho, is suspended opposite his forehead, v'nitkaimu kol hamikraot. And in this way, all these verses are in fact, they make sense, right? They work. Ptil al hatzitz, there is a ptil, there's a ribbon on the headband, that sits al haptil, and the headband is on the ptil. Remember, because it was doubled up, so part of it was over the headband. Uvatil al hamitznefet, and also a ribbon on the headgear milamala above. QED. So let's go on. V'haya, how are we doing on time? We're good. And it shall be al metzach Aaron, on Aaron's forehead, v'nasa Aaron et avon hakodashim, so that Aaron will carry the iniquity of the sacred objects, asher yakdishu bnei Yisrael, which the children of Israel sanctify. L'chol matnot kodshehem, according to all, or for all the sacred gifts, all of their sacred gifts. V'haya, so Rashi is definitely going to have to make sense of that to us. What is this sentence talking about? V'haya al mitzcho, it shall be on his forehead tamid, constantly. L'ratzon lahem, to find favor for them. Lifnei Hashem, before the Lord. So this is all the reasons. So this is, you can see how this is working as atonement. Okay, so that's the Rashi there. Here we go. V'nasa Aharon, Aaron shall bear, shall carry. Lashon slicha. But in this case, he says, you could understand this as having a connotation of seeking apology, of forgiveness. V'afal pichein, but nevertheless, eino zaz mimashma'o, you can also understand it in its literal sense. Aharon noseh, the fact that Aaron had to carry et ha-masa shel avon, he had to carry the burden of the iniquity. Nimtza mesulak avon avon min hakodashim, so that as long as he was carrying it, this particular iniquity was removed, mesulak, from the holy objects. The question is going to be what, and Rashi is going to discuss that. Et havon hakodashim, the iniquity of the sacred objects. And here's what it is. It's the iniquity that we're talking about is liratzot, to find favor, in other words, to find forgiveness, al hadam, regarding the blood, the al hachelev, and the fat, shekarvu betuma, which were offered up when they were no longer pure, that they were offered up in an impure form. Kamoshe shaninu, as we learn, and this is in this tractate Menachot, which refers to meal offerings, page 25. Eze avon hu noseh, what iniquity is he bearing? Im avon pigul. So they're going to do a process of elimination here. If we're referring to the iniquity of pigul, pigul is a technical term that refers to a situation where we know that the offerings all had specific and limited time in which they could be consumed. We know that many of the offerings, there were parts that were burnt on the altar, but with the exception of the olah and, let's say, the high priest's chatat, his sin offering, there were parts of those offerings that had to be consumed. And they had to be consumed within a certain time. Either they were just consumed in the course of a day, or in some cases overnight. And here's where it comes down. If, in fact, when the priest brought the offering and was offering it up, He simply had in mind that he was not going to eat it in the correct time, that he was going to eat it later on. He had this in his mind. It would be considered pigul. It was not, it was a tremendous sin, and that the priest was committing. And not only was the offering no longer acceptable, but the priest himself was subject to something called karet, which we've talked about before, which is a divine punishment. And pigul refers to consuming a sacrifice beyond its allotted time. So if we're talking about the tzitz that is going to atone for this, in other words, and possibly what we're saying is that despite this, the offering would be acceptable. Harei kvar ne'emar, it says elsewhere, it already states, is what it says, lo yeratzeh. It says it will not be acceptable. So the idea here, just to go back a little bit, is when it says regarding the blood and the fat that was offered in purity, we're saying so that despite the fact that it was, nevertheless, it would be acceptable, that this band would help that become acceptable. So there are other situations that disqualify an offering. The im avon notar, and if it happens to do with the iniquity of notar. Notar means that the entire offering has to be consumed, and then whatever wasn't consumed, there's strict rules about how you're to dispose of it. If they planned on leftovers, that's what they're referring to, that there were parts of the offering that they left over. Harei ne'emar. Again, it states already, lo yechashev, it will not be considered. Such an offering will not be considered. Ve'ein lomar sheyichaper alavon hakohen, and we certainly would not suggest that this is supposed to atone for the iniquity of a priest, sheikriv tameh, who was impure when he actually performed the sacrifice. That's not what this tzitz is coming to do. Sha'arei avon hakodashim, because regarding the this here says avon hakodashim. It's referring to the sacred objects. It's not nemar velo avon hamakrivim. It doesn't talk about the iniquity of the people who are offering it. So we're not talking about coming to atone for a priest who disqualified an offering by being in an impure state when they did it. It says this comes to atone for the iniquity regarding the sacred objects. Ha'eno meratzeh, and you're left with nothing but, it only comes to atone. Ela lahachshir hakorban. It only comes to atone so that it makes this offering acceptable, despite the fact that it's impure. David.
Yeah, so when we're talking about carrying iniquity, though, I mean, I think you just mentioned it. I'm just trying to understand this. So is it, I mean, are we talking about the iniquity associated with, kind of the objects itself, or are we talking about the iniquity associated with, the sins of the people that, he's atoning for, or is it both? It seems like we're talking more about the objects, not about the state. Anyway, that's my question.
In this particular case, I am sure, I'm sure, without having being absolutely certain, that we're talking about the fact that something happened to render the blood or the fat impure, and possibly no one knew about it. And ignorance of the law is not an excuse, right?
Okay.
Ignorance is not the same as unintentional, okay? Or rather, sorry, unintentional is not the same as accidental or whatever. But here, remember, we're talking about something so amazing when you think about it. If you're willing to meditate on this, we're talking about a rite that is such an intimate act with the divine. And so consequently, you have to use every precaution, okay, when entering into this situation. And here we are saying that that this particular maybe the way it's working is this. He has this headband that says Kodesh Lashem, sanctified to God, and it's on his head. Now, I'm speculating here. I want to be very clear. And what happened is something happened that the blood, something happened along the way in the process where the blood and the fat were impure, became impure. And by saying Kodesh Lashem, he's saying that despite this fact, the blood and the fat, which are like I think this is what this would refer to the imurim, right? These are like the very essence of the offering. That it's saying that that the Jewish people, as he represents them, are doing the best they can, that their intention is that this be as perfect as possible. And just because in this particular case, it didn't work out that way, and even though, please God, in 99.9% of the times, it does work out, okay, this should also be acceptable. Under normal circumstances, offering up an impure object to God is insulting.
Of course.
Okay.
So
and, yeah.
yeah. So okay. So you're saying that okay. So the iniquity he's carrying here is essentially kind of the exception case, right? Like you
Yes.
said, 99% of the time it's fine, but in this case there's some impurity, but yet it should still be acceptable, based on okay. So
Right.
that's what we're really talking about.
Right.
Okay.
And let me go on with the rest of this Rashi. I don't think there's
Wow.
too much more to go. And I think it'll underscore the point that I'm trying to make. And I actually think, even though we sound like we're talking about very arcane and irrelevant issues, I actually think there might be some dynamics going on here in terms of the imperfections of the world and trying to make a dividing line of some kind, a distinction of some kind between the various kinds of imperfections and what imperfections are still within the boundary of acceptability and what imperfections aren't within the boundary of acceptability, right? That just because it's imperfect doesn't make it no good, all right? So let's keep going. V'haya, right? It shall be. This sits al mitzvot tamid. It should always be on his forehead. He says, if Shalomar, you can't say, it's impossible to say, Sheyehe al mitzvot tamid. Literally, you can't take that literally, that he always has to have this thing on his forehead. Because in fact, the only time this thing is on his head, okay, is when he's actually performing the service, the ritual in the temple. Ela tamid leratzot lahem. But what the tamid is, this perpetuality, means it will always find favor on their account. Afilu eino al mitzcho, even if it isn't on his forehead. Shelo haya kohen gadol oved be'ota sha'ah, referring to that time when the high priest wasn't actually serving. He didn't do every single sacrifice. There were fellow priests who would help him. In fact, subsequently, I think there were 24 priestly families. Or am I thinking of something? No, I think they were. I'm sorry, forgive me. I don't think we're talking about Levitical families. We're talking about priestly families. I believe so. So there were other priests, and they all had their time to minister in the temple. Ulidivrei haomer, and according to the person who says odho al mitzcho, that it should be constantly on his forehead. That's what this is referring to, al mitzcho tamid. Mechaper umeratza, but they're saying just as long as it's on his forehead, it atones and finds favor. Ve'imlav eino meratzeh, but if it isn't on his forehead, it does not find favor. Nidrash al mitzchot tamid. He expounds this phrase al mitzchot tamid, on his forehead always. Melamed, then actually it infers, it teaches, it implies, shemi memashmesh bo be'odo al mitzcho, that he touches it. As long as it's on his head, he is touching it. Shelo yasich dato mimenu, so that he never loses his mind, he never loses concentration about the fact that this is on his forehead. And by the way, this particular idea applies also to the tefillin, that in fact you want to be conscious of the fact that you have your tefillin on you, and there's a custom of touching your head tefillin to make sure that you're always conscious of the fact that you're wearing them. Now, of course, it doesn't mean it's in the forefront of your consciousness that you can't think of anything else, because you wear your tefillin when you pray, and in times past, or people who are extremely, extremely pious, they might wear their tefillin all day. They would remove it if they had to relieve themselves, but otherwise they would keep their tefillin on all the time. So you want to be conscious of it. And we know that, when you wear something, you aren't always conscious of it, but you want to be aware of it. So I think this is where we are going to stop today. And it's a good place to stop, given the fact that it'll be, please God, next year, we'll come back to this. So that's the Nezer HaKodesh. So before I stop see, look at this. I have to actually have this right in the middle. I'm trying to have it as high up above my hairline as possible, and to care about these sorts of things. All right, I'll stop the recording.